Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. Welcome to Good Food on Earth's YouTube channel. If you could give us a brief introduction about yourself and your medical background, and then we'll go into your journey towards your Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease program.
Well, Amy, thank you for the opportunity to speak with St. John's and your program. My background, I grew up on an Aberdeen Angus and a dairy farm in upstate New York. I went to Yale University as an undergraduate, and then I went to medical school at Western Reserve University School of Medicine in Cleveland, Ohio. Then I took my subsequent internship and postgraduate residency in general surgery at the Cleveland Clinic. Then I had 2 years in the Army. My first year at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, my second year as a combat surgeon in Vietnam in 1967-68. And then when I returned, I was asked to join the staff at the Cleveland Clinic in the Department of General Surgery. And it was in the late 1970s, early 80s, when I was chairman of the Breast Cancer Task Force, that I became increasingly disillusioned with the fact that for no matter how many women I was doing breast surgery, I was doing absolutely nothing for the next unsuspecting victim. And that led me to a bit of global research. And it was really quite striking to find that there were multiple cultures where breast cancer rates were 30 and 40 times less frequent than the United States. And when you looked at rural Japan in the 1950s, breast cancer was very infrequently identified. And yet as soon as the Japanese women would migrate to the United States, by the second and third generation, still pure Japanese American, they now had the same rate of breast cancer as their Caucasian counterpart. Now, even more compelling perhaps was cancer of the prostate. In the entire nation of Japan in 1958, how many autopsy-proven deaths were from cancer of the prostate? 18, the most mind-boggling public health data I've ever encountered. 20 years later, in 1970, they were up to 137, which still pales in comparison to the 28,000 who will die from prostate cancer in this country this year. So somewhere along the line, it became apparent to me that there would be more bang for the buck if we would look at cardiovascular disease, which is the leading killer of women and men in Western civilization. And yet I was encountering multiple cultures in this global review where cardiovascular disease was virtually non-existent. And really that led me to think that if we could really focus on people eating to save their heart, then at the same time, they would markedly diminish the likelihood of developing common Western cancers of breast, prostate, colon, and perhaps pancreatic. And that sort of led to doing a bit of research with a small number of patients with heart disease who had failed their first or second bypass. They had failed their first or second angioplasty, or they were too sick for this procedure, or they had refused. 5 were told by their expert cardiologist they wouldn't survive the year. And those 5 all made it beyond 20 years. And it was really quite striking to see that when we took these patients who were seriously ill with heart disease and got them to eat totally whole food, plant-based nutrition, not only did we stop their disease, but we also saw striking examples of disease reversal. So that when I retired from surgery, this was too good and too exciting to leave it alone. And therefore, I got rehired by the Cleveland Clinic to direct the cardiovascular disease prevention and reversal program at the Cleveland Clinic Wellness Institute, where I work today. And what we do there is once a month, we have a number of patients who go through an intensive 6-hour seminar, trying to have them understand exactly how it is that they have produced this disease and precisely how they can be empowered as a locus of control to halt and reverse their disease. So that's where I stand today, and happy to talk with you about any aspect of this today.
Right. Thank you. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your study and how, what was the type of diet, like in detail, what was it that you recommended to your patients? What success you had with compliance, and you mentioned that they had success in reversing their heart disease, and was that with the majority of the people who were in the study?
You see, where the rubber hits the road on a study like this is whether or not you get compliance, adherence, because it is a very, very significant lifestyle change. And that was really where I was most concerned, because I had no experience in trying to achieve compliance. And so for this first group of 24 patients, I felt it was going to be so important for this that I saw them every 2 weeks, and I would draw their cholesterol. That was for the first 5 years. And by the end of 5 years, I got a little bit bolder. Instead of seeing them every 2 weeks, I was seeing them once a month. And then that continued until the end of a decade. And at the end of a decade, they were really by now pretty well on autopilot. And so I began seeing them quarterly. And then I wrote them up at the end of 12 years, which pretty well makes it the longest study of its type in the medical literature, because most of these studies are 2 or 3 years or less. And so it was really very exciting to see what happened to these people after 4 years. And, after 12 years. The excitement was all of them lost on chest pain or angina. And when we carefully, in the small group of 11 of them, we did repeat angiograms. That is, we looked again at the blockages that were in the coronary arteries to the heart. And it was striking to see the degree of reversal in some of these. Now, it's not going to be in everybody, but about a quarter of patients where the plaque is young and soft and made up of inflammation, fat, and cholesterol, the body has a remarkable capacity to reverse it. On the other hand, even those patients that have a blockage or a plaque that is made up of fibrosis and scar and calcification, and it's not going to go away. The thing is that even those patients were able to improve to the point where they absolutely were able to return to full activity without restriction. And the reason for that is that when you have these patients successfully eat whole food, plant-based nutrition, it's not just the level of the plaque in it that improves. The entire coronary artery vascular tree that is supplying the entire heart, all those vessels begin to become more supple and regain their capacity to widen and dilate, which is why these patients improve as well. Now, the adherence is the absolute key. I cannot emphasize that enough. But what is the mechanism involved, and why are we stressing whole food, plant-based nutrition? Because it's fascinating to know that there is an area where all experts are in agreement, and that is the following. All experts would agree that where this disease, coronary artery disease, has its inception, its onset, its beginning, is when we progressively injure the life jacket and the guardian of our blood vessel, which happens to be that delicate innermost lining called the endothelium. If your audience can try, there's 2 scientific terms I'd like for them to try to remember from this presentation. One is the endothelium, the delicate innermost lining of the artery, and the other is the magic molecule of gas that the endothelium produces, nitric oxide. Because nitric oxide is truly the great protector and salvation of all of our blood vessels because of its remarkable functions, which are: one, nitric oxide keeps all the cellular elements within our bloodstream flowing smoothly like Teflon rather than Velcro. It keeps things from getting sticky. Number two, nitric oxide is the greatest vessel dilator in the body. When you climb stairs, the arteries to your heart, the arteries to your legs, they widen, they dilate. That's nitric oxide. Number three, nitric oxide keeps the wall of the artery from becoming thick or inflamed. Protects us from getting high blood pressure or hypertension. Number four, now this is the absolute truth. Number four, a safe and normal amount of nitric oxide will protect us all from ever developing blockages or plaque. So literally everybody on the planet, whether they're from London, Berlin, Chicago, New York, or from St. John's from Canada, if they have cardiovascular disease, it is because by now, in the past decades, they have so sufficiently trashed, injured, compromised, and turned their endothelial system into a train wreck that they no longer have enough nitric oxide to protect themselves from developing blockages and plaque. However, the good news here is this: this is not a malignancy. This is a completely benign foodborne illness. And once you can get patients to understand what are the foods that must never again pass their lips, then they're going to injure the endothelial cell. Then what happens is the endothelial system is restored, makes enough nitric oxide so you can halt the disease, and often we see significant elements of disease reversal. And you probably want to know, or your audience should know now, what are the foods that every time you eat them, they injure your endothelial cells? They are, number one, any drop of oil. Olive oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower oil, sunflower oil, coconut oil, palm oil, oil in a cracker, oil in a piece of bread, oil in a salad dressing. Oil injures the endothelial cells, as does anything with a mother or a face. That is to say, meat, fish, chicken, fowl, turkey, and eggs injure endothelial cells, as does dairy, milk, cream, butter, cheese, ice cream, and yogurt. And Coke, Pepsi, sugary drink, and sugary foods. Cakes, pies, cookies, stevia, agave, excesses of maple syrup, molasses, and honey, and coffee with caffeine for patients who have honey. Yes, they can have tea with caffeine, black tea, green tea. They can have coffee that is decaf, but not coffee with caffeine from my patient.
So Dr. Esselstyn,
so the absolute key of what I just said, have your audience understand the endothelial cell and also nitric oxide. All right.
Yeah, and nitric oxide, I think in Dr. Michael Greger's book of How Not to Die, he talks about some vegetables that are really good sources of nitric oxide, like beets, for example.
Well, rather than have, first of all, I love Michael Greger, and we're good friends. I don't want people to focus simply on, I think beets are wonderful. I have no problem with that. But you have to remember that half the planet Earth has never heard of heart disease. If you're a cardiac surgeon and you're going to hang out your shingle in Okinawa, rural China, the Papua Highlands, Central Africa, the Tarahumara Indians in northern Mexico, forget it. You better plan on selling pencils. They don't have heart disease. Why? They all thrive on whole food, plant-based nutrition without oil. So and it's not because they're all living on beets.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They're just not eating any of the foods that are going to injure their endothelium.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to enhance, sure, have some beets on a frequent basis. But remember, there are a whole host of these wonderful vegetables that can get the job done. So what do we want you, I've mentioned what we've taken away. What do we want you to eat then? We want you to eat all these marvelous whole grains for your cereal, bread, pasta, rolls, and bagels. 101 different types of legumes, beans, and lentils. All these marvelous red, yellow, and green leafy vegetables. Sweet potatoes, white potatoes, and fruit. And it's really quite exciting to think that food can be so incredibly powerful. It can injure you or can enhance. Try to stay away from processed food. That's really where the danger is as well. Now, there are some interesting studies. You mentioned, when does this begin? Actually, in childhood, if you autopsy children who died of the causes, you already see the early fatty streaking in early childhood. There's an interesting study of women and men between the ages of 17 and 34 who have died of accidents, homicides, and suicides. Between the ages of 17 and 34. And at those autopsies, the disease is now ubiquitous. You go to school in this country, and you go to high school and you graduate, you get a diploma, but you also get the foundation for heart disease. Mm-hmm. Not enough to have your cardiac events yet, but therefore it's not at all surprising that if you've got the foundation for heart disease when you're a late teenager, that if you eat this horrible Western diet through your 20s, 30s, and 40s and continue to further destroy the endothelium and its ability to make nitric oxide, it's not surprising that by the time you're in your 40s, 50s, and 60s, we now start seeing these current cardiovascular events, heart attack.
And for people here who grew up eating fish and now they're told that fish is heart healthy, what do you have to say in response to that?
I think the studies would say that that's absolutely not true. When you look at the studies that are available on the Inuit, Eskimos who thrive on fish, they're loaded with vascular disease. It's very unhealthy. And as a matter of fact, there's this rage for this ketogenic diet only because it helps with weight loss. It's absolutely lethal on your vessels, and high in meat, high in animal protein. And that's the work of Stanley Hazen and his team from the Cleveland Clinic, who showed that when you look at the molecules of lecithin and carnitine, which are in all meats, dairy, seafood, and so forth, when people who are omnivores, who eat those foods, eat them, they develop, because of the bacteria that reside in the intestinal tract of persons who are omnivores eating those foods. Those bacteria will convert the molecules of lecithin and carnitine into a molecule called TMA. TMA is trimethylamine, and is rapidly oxidized by your liver to trimethylamine oxide. TMAO has been shown to injure your blood vessels. Now, the other interesting thing is, so therefore, just reflecting back what we said about the ketogenic diet, all that meat is resulting in high levels of TMAO in these persons who are eating it, and they're really trashing their blood vessels. But the other interesting thing about Stan's study is when he took patients who were totally plant-based and gave them, let's say, a lamb chop, and then measured their blood level of TMAO. wasn't there. Wasn't there because persons who are totally plant-based do not possess the intentional bacteria that are capable of converting lecithin and carnitine into TMAO. And it's interesting that of all the meats that people eat, like TMAO, there's none other than fish that make it higher.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting to learn. Like a lot of people hear that fish is, a healthier food to eat. So they're, when they try to get healthy, they'll go for, boneless, skinless chicken breast and fish foods.
Well, if you're comparing red meat to fish, it's a question of whether you want to be shot or hung.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's an amazing thing that people are doing a lot of research into the microbiome and how the bacteria that or the microorganisms that we actually have in our bodies is actually, we create that environment based on the food that we eat.
Right.
We invite certain ones in.
You change your internal bacterial environment either to a positive one when you're eating plant-based or a negative one if you're eating as an omnivore and a lot of meat, dairy, and seafood.
Mm-hmm. So we know now the benefits of a whole food plant-based diet on the cardiovascular system and the power it has to prevent and reverse heart disease. So can you tell me, because you got interested in this because of breast cancer. So what would be the link then towards breast cancer, or prostate cancer, or other cancers?
Well, there are several things that are of interest here. For instance, if you look at colon cancer, we know that Dennis Burkitt, who was a missionary for 17 years in Africa, he never saw a case of colon cancer, which is one of the most common cancers in this country, of cancer of the large intestine. It's non-existent there. As far as breast cancer concerned, I think I mentioned when I started this program with you, there are multiple cultures where breast cancer rates are 30 and 40 times less than the United States. That's really quite powerful when you think about it. And prostate cancer in Japan, I mentioned, in 1958, there was something like 18 cases identified, autopsy proven in the entire nation. So that's pretty powerful information.
Yeah. What are the links to dementia and Alzheimer's?
Well, again, those that study dementia, like I was thinking right now of Aisha and Dean Shazai, who are working at Loma Linda University in California. It's interesting that the things that are so important to try to avoid dementia are, number one, plant-based nutrition, 2, adequate sleep, 3, adequate exercise, 4, adequate socialization. Meditation seems to help. They like you to focus not on too many things all at once, but have a sense of focus. It's really rather fascinating to also look at, if you're in the West, if you are eating a typical Western diet, by age 50, MRIs of the brain begin to show these little white spots. What are these little white spots? They are little strokes. Now, at age 50, not a problem. You've got a big brain and you've got tiny little strokes. Apparently, you can still get along fine. But if you keep eating that same diet and you're no longer 50 and you're 65 years old, you may find yourself saying, more often than before, sweetheart, where'd I leave the car keys? Well, you blink your eyes and now suddenly you're 75. You're still eating the same old Western diet. And you find yourself saying, sweetheart, where did I leave the car? Now, you get through that, and now you're 85. And you look at her and you say, are you my sweetheart?
Mm-hmm.
I can't reverse that disease. You don't suddenly wake up at age 85 with dementia. You work hard in all those preceding decades to lay the foundation for that disease. Doesn't have to happen.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that diet is more influential than genetics?
Oh, far. Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
No question. Well, there's a saying, genes loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. For example, let's say I've got a pet family where all the parents and grandparents have had some type of cardiovascular disease, either heart attack or stroke.
Mm-hmm.
And these people are petrified that, without a doubt, that they're going to be victims of these diseases as they get more senior. Nothing is further from the truth. Really, lifestyle can change genes expression.
Mm-hmm.
You can turn on genes and turn genes off. And you turn on a gene that is favorable for protecting you from heart disease when you're eating plant-based. When you're eating the Western diet, you're enhancing the genes that are going to precipitate the formation of vascular disease.
So what would you say to somebody who thinks, well, I don't really want to change what I eat and I'll just follow my doctor's advice and I'll take, high blood pressure medications or a statin for my cholesterol and...
Yeah, that's tragic. That is really true. I think the best word to describe that is tragic.
Mm-hmm.
Because look, none of those drugs with cardiovascular disease, none of the drugs, none of the stents, none of the bypasses have one single solitary thing to do with the causation of the illness, okay? And it's been so profound that we've noticed here, we've now treated close to 1,000 patients with cardiovascular disease. And time after time after time, we have been able to show not only do you reverse the blockage that's forming in the carotid artery to the brain, the blockage that is forming in the coronary arteries to the heart, the blockage that is forming in the arteries going to the legs. It's a profound change, but it's no different than the millions and millions of people who never have cardiovascular disease throughout the planet who are eating plant-based. And there are now literally hundreds upon hundreds of absolutely delicious plant-based meals that people can treasure and look forward to that are going to protect them. In other words, all we have to do is get people to give up a delicious type of food that is absolutely destroying them for a pile of delicious food that is going to enhance their health. Remember the two words that I want your audience to remember today. The endothelial cell, which they have trashed with the Western diet, and the nitric oxide, which is the magic gas that the endothelium produces that protects and restores our vasculature. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think it's amazing. I changed to a vegetarian when I was 16. And at first, people think, you give up the food, the standard American diet, and what are you going to eat? And there's nothing to eat. You're just going to have vegetables. But what I found personally was there's this whole cornucopia of plant foods, and the tastes are they're incomparable. And the feeling that you get after eating is so much better than any feeling you get eating the standard American diet. I mean, what's your experience with it?
Oh yeah, no, I think the greatest gift that we have given our children and our grandchildren is eating whole food plant-based nutrition, because all you have to do is to look at our family tree. Look at my parents and grandparents, my wife's parents and grandparents, loaded with strokes and vascular disease and the common Western cancers. They were all really a walking billboard of the tragedy of Western nutrition. And it's just so exciting to think that without resorting to these hideous drugs that are so expensive and have brutal side effects, you can simply reverse all this with food, because we've been talking about cardiovascular disease today. But let's just talk about the other benefits. Obviously, what happens to our patients who have obesity? Those that have had what about the risk of stroke? It's gone. The risk of vascular dementia, gone. The risk of diabetes, gone. Hypertension, gone. Ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, gone. Rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, multiple sclerosis, gone. Allergies and asthma, gone. And imagine, we have never before in medicine, and I guess this is why I'm so passionate still about medicine, even though it's been a number of years since I've retired from surgery. We are truly right now at the cusp of what could be a seismic revolution in medicine. And the seismic revolution is never going to come about through the invention of another pill or drug, or from another stent or another procedure or another bypass operation. No, the seismic revolution will come about when we in the profession have the will and the grit and the determination to share with the public what is the lifestyle that will empower them through a knowledge of nutritional literacy to be able to absolutely annihilate chronic illness.
Yeah, it's I think it's an amazing turn, because I myself grew up, my grandmother was a nurse, and they thought, you know, you follow all of your doctor's advice and you end up with relatives who've got Ziploc baggies full of medications, and they gain weight and they don't feel well. And then you get to a certain age where everybody just talks about how unwell they feel and aches and pains, and they think it's, you know, just expected. But then you have, you know, people who work hard all their lives, wait for retirement to, you know, enjoy themselves, and they get to that point and they're sick and they can't enjoy it. And it's really just, it's a shame, but it's nice to know that people like yourself and some of the other doctors who are coming out and giving this information, telling people they have the potential to prevent and reverse these chronic degenerative diseases, to have optimal health in their lives. I mean, it's advice like coming from someone as such as yourself is really powerful.
Thank you.
So what I'd like to ask is just if you could, you talked about your current work at the Cleveland Clinic, and if you'd like to address some of the work of your family members, because I know that they are involved in helping to advocate for whole food plant-based nutrition.
Well, never gotten this going without Anne, my wife, with her support. She did all the recipes in my book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. And then she has also worked with my daughter, Jane, who's a nurse. Jane is quite remarkable in that she is 3 or 4 years ago, she initiated the first national conference for cardiovascular disease for women. And which I thought was very exciting, because often women sort of get treated as a sort of second-class citizen or patient. And in addition, Jane has worked with Anne, my wife, and they have written the Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease Cookbook. And Jane has also written a number of books with my son, Rip, the fireman, who has gotten into this because he now works for Whole Foods Market, because he found that the leading killer of firemen is not fires, cardiovascular disease, often at a relatively young age. You can't fight fires when your arteries to your heart are all clogged with cholesterol and plaque. So there have been a few other members of the family who've really come on board, and it's very exciting for our children now to know as they grow senior that they were not going to have to worry about these chronic diseases as well. we think it's the greatest gift that we could have given our kids.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
And, and grandkids. Yeah.
Yeah. So now you started a whole food plant-based diet in 1984, is that right?
That's right.
And I think are you 85 now?
Yeah.
So how do you feel?
I feel like I've been eating plant-based nutrition now for, what is it now? Is it 34 years? Something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's, no, I'm very excited when I look at other of my colleagues who are my age who have continued to eat the Western diet. They're beginning to drop off, sadly. Many of our friends have succumbed to the common Western illness, or they're living with these illnesses. And but on the other hand, there are a number who have said they're going to make the change, and they have, and it's very exciting to see how they have really blossomed. So in our own family, we try to really walk the walk. You've got to do that. I mean, I can't ask patients to do something that I wouldn't be willing to do myself.
Mm-hmm.
And my father had his first heart attack at age 43. So there's your genes, if somebody wants to talk about genes. But as I said earlier, genes loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. The analogy that sometimes I use is to explain that is, think of a village or a community that is right next to a river. And during the dry season, only the very, very strongest swimmers can get across, all right? However, if we look at the dry season, everybody can walk across without getting wet over their knees even. Well, that's kind of the way it is when you're eating whole food plant-based nutrition. It wipes out any of the dangerous genes. It converts them to a gene that is going to enhance your health. And again, as I said before, genes loads the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger.
So could you tell us, give us an example of what you eat in a day?
Sure. I particularly love old-fashioned Quaker oats as a dry cereal. Okay, put them in the bowl, dry cereal. I wet them down with oat milk.
Mm-hmm.
Oat.
Now this
milk
you get has no oil in it, right? You can get that.
No, you can't have oil. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And raisins, banana, and always raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, and blackberries. You cannot believe the number of phytonutrients that are in these berries. You have those, and it's easy to eat those berries with this cereal. The oats are loaded with polyphenolic compounds, antioxidants as well. So you're really getting a wonderful bunch of nutrients. Now at lunch, here as we get into wintertime, we almost always will have a soup with some sort of whole grain bread that we toast with it, and kind of light there. And then supper, my favorite meal would be beans and rice, covered with cut up peppers, cut up tomatoes, cut up scallions, maybe some corn, and maybe some cranberry, and then some salsa over the beans and rice, and that's just absolutely delicious. Well, Rip has some wonderful lasagnas that he makes that are steal your eye right out of your head. Terrific. For snacks, maybe a whole wheat bagel with some hummus that does not have tahini or olive oil.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, that sounds pretty simple and really tasty.
Yeah, great.
So for here in Newfoundland, we're actually pretty lucky because we have tons of wild berries. And if people are happy enough to go out, they can pick their own berries. We've got wild blueberries and raspberries and strawberries and just a load of berries that they can get during the end of summer, early fall. But what we also have, and I think one of the things I like to address with people is the food security and sustainability issue. And I'm just going to tell you some of the other stuff that people can grow here, and then maybe you could tell me if it's adequate for a whole food plant-based nutrition lifestyle. One of the big things is potatoes, cabbage, rutabaga, as we call it, a turnip, kales, carrots, beets, cauliflower, broccoli, you know, just mostly root vegetables used to be grown, but now it's kind of a bit more expansive. But those are kind of the main things that people grow here. And then we have access to a lot of lentils. I know Canada is one of the #1 producers of lentils in the world, and people here grew up eating yellow split peas. And yeah, so with those foods, can people thrive on them nutritionally? And yeah, can they thrive on them nutritionally?
Oh, absolutely. When you think about the nutrition of the professional athletes are suddenly now getting so interested in plant-based nutrition because they have, not only do they have greater stamina, but their recovery time is less. And the strongest human being on the planet, Baboudian, is a German who can lift over 1,200 pounds. And it's enormous. And he's totally plant-based, because people who are naive about this think, well, how are you going to get your protein? Well, spinach is 57% protein, hamburger is 37% protein. And really, it's exciting to think that increasingly, as you have these public figures turning to plant-based nutrition, hopefully the pendulum is going to swing. It's just ridiculous to think that a government as large as the United States is being constituted into debtor's prison by the health costs of this nation. That so much of the wealth of this country is going into the health industry, which is totally imbalanced. And it's only because Americans are so sick. And it's just if we can get people to eat plant-based. It's interesting that there was a couple of economists from the University of Chicago reporting in the Chicago University Press in 1999. They estimate that if we could get rid of heart disease, we would save our nation $40 trillion. What would that do to our national debt? When we could begin taking care of the infrastructure, the grid system, education, all these other things that have been left behind because there isn't simply money. It's just being poured into the healthcare industry, which is crazy.
There's a favorite saying of mine I'd like to share with you, and it's from a Buddhist monk, and you have to excuse my language, but this is verbatim. So the only thing you have to worry about, the only thing you have to do is eat, sleep, and shit. The rest is none of your business. And I thought about that. It's kind of stuck with me, but it actually makes a lot of sense. If people know how to feed themselves right, if they know how to look after their health, then it seems that it ends up solving a lot of issues. Like, it's really cost effective, it's sustainable, it's good for your health and for the environment. Yeah, I don't know, what do you think about that?
Well, I totally in agreement. There's so many other benefits that we don't talk about. Look what it does for the planet. Look what it does for the contamination that you're getting from all of the nitrogenous waste of the animal industry. It's just crazy. And I don't know of anybody who would suggest that red meat is healthy. I mean, Walter Willett, who is the professor of public health at Harvard, is on record as saying the ideal amount of red meat to eat is 0. Pretty powerful. I want to just say that you mentioned a few vegetables, and there's something that I always mention to the patients when they say, which are the vegetables that I want them to eat? They are bok choy, Swiss chard, kale, collards, collard greens, beet greens, mustard green, turnip greens, Napa cabbage, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, cilantro, parsley, spinach, and arugula and asparagus. And the top 5 are discard spinach, arugula, beet greens, and beets.
Mm.
So, and look what it does for memory.
Mhm. Yeah.
Killing, just wrapping this up with you.
Mhm.
Final thing I want to mention. When I have somebody who has heart disease and they're converting to whole food plant-based nutrition, there's one other thing that is not in my book that we have added in the last 7 years, and that is this. I asked them to imagine if they could shrink their head to a size that could fit inside the artery to their heart, believe it or not, and look at the plaque. They would see that what they're looking at is an absolute cauldron,
Mhm.
a cauldron of oxidative inflammation. So we need truly antioxidants, all right? No, don't go down to the health food store and buy a jug of pills that says antioxidant because it doesn't work and it's going to be harmful. We want them to get their antioxidants from food, all right? What food? Food that is high in what we call ORAC value, ORAC, oxygen radical absorptive capacity. So if they're having raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, and blackberries on their morning oat cereal, that is a terrific start. However, I need them to know that nothing is more powerful than green leafy vegetables for antioxidants. I need them to chew 6 times a day. 6 times a day, not juicing, not smoothies. I want them to chew a green leafy vegetable 6 times a day that is roughly the size of their fist after it has first been boiled in water, 5.5 to 6 minutes, so it's nice and tender. And then they must then anoint it with several drops of a delightful balsamic vinegar because the acetic acid in the vinegar has been shown to restore the nitric oxide synthase enzyme contained within the endothelial cell that is responsible for making nitric oxide. And they're going to chew this alongside their breakfast cereal, again as a mid-morning snack, again with their lunch and sandwich, that's 3, mid-afternoon 4, dinner time 5, and of course I adore it when they have that evening snack of kale. What are you doing? All day long they are basking and bathing that horrible oxidative cauldron of inflammation with nature's most powerful antioxidant. And this is really a very very effective way. It's safe, not an expensive medicine. We've never seen anybody go to the emergency room with an overdose of green leafy vegetables.
And would you say that, I guess you can include cabbage in there? I know it's a cruciferous vegetable. It's not super leafy, but
Yeah, you can do that. You can do that.
yeah. Well, that sounds
So remember what we're trying to do. We're trying to restore nitric oxide. I've mentioned how the greens do it for the endothelial cell. What the greens also do is they enhance the capacity of the bone marrow to produce more endothelial progenitor cells. What are they? The endothelial progenitor cells replace our senescent, injured, worn out endothelial cells. So they're key. And they are enhanced when you're eating green leafy vegetables. They increase the number of endothelial progenitor cells. And also, when you are chewing a green leafy vegetable, you are chewing a nitrate. As you chew that nitrate, and it mixes with the facultative anaerobic bacteria that reside in the crypts and grooves of your tongue, those bacteria reduce the nitrate you are chewing to a nitrite in your mouth. Now, when you swallow the nitrite, it is further reduced by your gastric acid to more nitric oxide, which can now enter your nitric oxide pool. So you can see how absolutely powerful in 3 different mechanisms how green leafy vegetables are enhancing the health of the person who has cardiovascular disease, or anybody for that matter.
And I just want to, I have a question about that before we close up, because you mentioned the nitrate. And there is a difference. I just want to clarify for the people who watch between, there's those nitrites and nitrates from processed meats. And then there's ones that are naturally occurring. Yeah. Right. So there's a difference between those two. And the ones that are good are always from vegetable foods.
Yeah, since you're not going to be eating meat, that should not be a problem.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just going to talk about your website for a moment and your books, and we'll close up. So if people want to check out more information from your work, they can go to www.dresselstyn.com. I'm going to provide a link below the video. And if anybody's interested in Dr. Esselstyn's books, there's the Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease book and the Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease cookbook. Also, as you mentioned, Rip Esselstyn has the Engine 2 diet, and he has a couple of books as well. And Jane Esselstyn puts on some, she gives some talks as well, and I think there's one coming up now that's going to be the Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease and Alzheimer's disease for women. Could you tell us when those dates are going to be?
I don't have the date on the tip of my tongue, but I think it's in early March.
Okay, yeah, and I think it's on your website as well, so if anybody's interested. Yeah. Oh, well, thank you for your time for the interview, and Happy New Year.
Thank you, Amy. Same to you.
Okay, goodbye.